Dr. Jordan B. Peterson often talks about how men have approached him everywhere he goes to tell him how much of a positive influence his message, his work, his preaching of personal responsibility and existentialism and the pursuit of meaning has had on their lives. And I would sincerely like to say that I am one of those men. I, at 15, 16, struggled pretty badly with depression. I didn't eat properly. I was referred to counselling. I was politically uninformed, pretty nihilistic, and had a series of difficult relationships. And I would say, Jordan, funnily enough, yourself, Carl, and my own dad were probably three of the most prominent men in my life, weirdly enough, that have made me who I am today. So cheers to my dad, cheers to you, and thanks to Jordan Peterson. However, recently, I will say that Jordan's tone, the scope of his content, and some of his most recent frustrations with the sorry state in the modern world it felt like it's made him stray from his message. And we say this sincerely, both from the fact that he congratulated you coming back on Twitter to the fact that I'm a great admirer of his. We say this with all the love and best intentions in the world. I think what I'd like to do today is point out a few areas where Professor Peterson has misstepped, and hopefully, if his audience see this and pull them up on it, or even if, Jordan, if you're watching, thank you for all you've done. If you do see this, please understand that these are meant to be constructive critiques. I did want to start off first, specifically with a piece you did a couple of months ago now, after he released his Conservative Manifesto. And I felt very much the same as you. This is available for everyone to watch on our website and our second channel as well. You specifically picked apart the philosophical missteps of it, because I think you can obviously explain it a little better than me, but it did seem like materialist libertarianism, which wasn't as metaphysical as his usual stuff was as well.
Yeah, and the thing I have at the moment, the way it looked like, I can understand why Jordan Peterson is so angry about the way he's been treated.
Yeah,
right? Because he's obviously a very empathetic man, and he has been abused. Frankly, I see what has happened to him as abuse, and okay, well, that happens to all of us, really, because we oppose left-wing politics, and so obviously what they do is just abuse you as much as they can. That's fine for someone like me who isn't nearly as sensitive as Dr. Peterson, but I think that maybe he needs to take a step back and be like, oh, hang on a second, I've got some healing to do, or something like that, because it seems to me that he's created a very hard shell around himself, which is an understandable reaction to the way he's been treated, but not necessarily something that he wants to have permanently on.
I think to presage the conclusion of why I'm doing this is there is definitely a time for war and for conflict. There are, unfortunately, enemies all around us who have taken his kindness for weakness and have denigrated all of his noble efforts to help men like me, like some of our audience.
Yeah.
But I think, in many respects, Jordan doesn't have to be everyone all at once. He doesn't have to be the kindly paternal father who speaks meaningful things to individuals and also tackle every grand scale political issue with the fire and fury of an impassioned preacher. And for me, I agreed with your points about the at odds philosophy in this that wasn't what you normally would, but mainly just as a former English literature student and knowing about language and that, I felt like his tenet, which I really resonated with when I was younger, before I got into media and things, be precise in your speech, was lost here, actually. And I felt like he was partially because he was reading off the teleprompter, but also because his intonations were a lot more forceful and angry, and he had quite a few unnecessary adverbs in there as well.
Yeah.
And it was almost, I don't like a lot of what Stephen King does, but one of Stephen King's writing tenets was always, if you want language that has meaning, one, don't lead your audience by the hand and tell them how to feel with what they're reading with loads of adverbs, because they're often redundant. And two, with your sort of treatise on thick concepts, within the language itself, if you want to be precise, it should contain what you're trying to connote anyway. You shouldn't need so many superfluous adverbs. So it felt like it needed a couple more drafts, and it felt like maybe a couple of years ago, he wouldn't have spoken that poorly off the cuff, and also he wouldn't have released something like this that was was only halfway done,
Hmm.
he wouldn't have rushed it out the door. It would have gone for a couple more drafts. And so
Yeah.
it didn't feel as polished as a lot of his other work has done before, which has really struck a chord with people. So I think patience and paternalism does a lot more than what I'm sure Jordan is trying to connote as passion. He's trying to convey some sort of frustration with the leftists who are attacking us, but sometimes it just comes across as misplaced because he's still talking to us and it just feels a bit angry.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I felt. I thought the tone was wrong because if he was berating some leftist about how Marxism is nonsense, then fair enough. Okay, I can understand a harsh tone, but that wasn't what this was for. So I was bemused by the tone. I didn't. I expected him to come across as, like you say, more paternalistic and more fatherly in presenting this, and he really didn't.
No.
But anyway, I'll let you carry
No,
on.
no, please. So one of the main things where he seems to be going off as well is his recent frustration with anonymous accounts on Twitter.
Yeah.
And this again seems to be a bit of a misstep where he is acting off an empathetic gut reaction to the way that this new development in technology can be used by people who are disingenuous, who are narcissistic, who have dark designs. But much like his critiques of the original C16 bill, which launched him into academic and global social media stardom, he's saying that back then, okay, they were doing something censorious under the guise of compassion, and that could be used to censor noble people. Much like this, where you're trying to revoke this to stop the worst excesses of humanity exploiting anonymous accounts, you will end up having unintended consequences, and it is worth exploring that. So this all started because he said, by failing to separate the anonymous cowardly troll demons from real people in the comments section, YouTube and other social media platforms are enabling sadistic Machiavellian psychopaths and narcissists. And he put a poll, and Jordan lost the poll. And I say lost because he has demonstrated since his commitment to saying that we should have segregated social medias for those who want to verify their identity and those who don't. I have no objection, conceptually, to that as a platform, but when you start enforcing that across all the platforms, then you create a digital identity infrastructure which, if co-opted by the elite, will create the exact kind of ESG score social credit system that Jordan is also arguing against.
Just as a quick thought of my own, like I've got no interest in anonymity online. I'm not anonymous. You know, everyone knows who I am, so I'm not invested in protecting anonymity. But I think that what's happening is that because he's interviewed Benjamin Netanyahu and he's part of the Daily Wire, there are anti-Semitic trolls online who come out and say these things, and I think that's what he's responding to. But the thing is, I think calling them sadistic Machiavellian psychopaths and narcissists is giving them too much credit, frankly. I think that they're desperate people who don't have any leverage or power in the real world. And so, like, enabling narcissists usually requires they are able to take credit for their actions and to get public kudos from it, which obviously they can't. And psychopaths, well, maybe, but I feel like it's actually desperate people speaking from a position of profound weakness. Even if I don't agree with their perspective, I think ruining their lives for holding a wrong opinion. I'm actually on the Mark Zuckerberg train when it comes to this. Mark Zuckerberg, when he was forced to remove Holocaust denial from Facebook, he was like, look, I don't agree with it, but I don't think that they are lying. I think they have just a true conviction that is wrong. And so I don't want to persecute them for it. And I actually agree with that. You know, I think they hold a true conviction that is wrong. And I don't think they're nearly as important as Dr. Peterson is making out.
No, and nothing in recent weeks has made the, I don't know, alt-right, I suppose, look more ridiculous than some of the stupid
Kanye
stuff
West.
that Kanye has said. And Kanye, despite wearing a Balenciaga mask, is hardly anonymous. And also, if he's talking about narcissists, I don't really think you can call anonymous accounts narcissistic when lots of people, specifically on Instagram, are not anonymous, and that is the main vector of transmission for narcissism that is damaging young women today. And unfortunately, as we'll go on to later, and I'm glad you brought up the point about anti-Semitism possibly being a driving motivator for this, Jordan's noble crusade to reduce anti-Semitism by bringing the Muslim and Jewish religions together, despite generations of conflict, is leaving
centuries of conflict.
Exactly, is leaving him open to manipulation by Machiavellians who are not anonymous and don't hide their intentions, but they do off the platforms outside their engagement with Jordan. And so Jordan may need to be careful that his compassion is not again being exploited as a form of weakness. So if we can just go on and go through the next couple of tweets, please. So Jordan then starts replying to some of the anonymous accounts. I think this is the first misstep, because if he truly does believe that these people aren't worth engaging with, why give them oxygen? Because you're only going to frustrate yourself. I believe he has said before that Twitter has been addictive, and he did speak to, I think it was Rex Chapman before, and he said, imagine waking up to a mob of angry neighbours outside your house. That's how it feels like being on Twitter. And he did break down in tears from that. And this isn't to make memes and mock Jordan for crying. You can see that the man is sincerely affected by all the evil in the world, and I admire him for his ability to feel compassion. But if it does affect you in this way, Jordan, maybe limit your own usage, because these people, some of them really do hate you. Some of them are engaging on good faith. For example, he's saying, think for a second, why would we mix the trolls in with the real people? Think about what that enables. I didn't say they should be banned. I said they should be separated from verified people. But that does create a class of distinguished speakers, the same problem with the check marks all over again.
But the problem with the formulation here is trolls are real people.
Yes.
You just don't know which real people that they are.
Yes. If we can go to the next one, please. He then has a very good faith engagement with Eliza Blue. He later then told her to try out the self-authoring suite because she couldn't meet a fella because of her background. She made a good joke about it, saying, oh, the good doctor's shaming me for my love life. So there is still some wholesome interactions on Twitter, Jordan. And she said, Dear Jordan Peterson, political distance, survivors, activists, journalists and whistleblowers globally deserve an opportunity to remain anonymous online and be heard. History has shown us why this is important. This is a perfect example, especially if Jordan keeps talking to members of the Muslim world to try to moderate, then who would possibly be using anonymous Twitter accounts and VPNs to circumvent the bans that those countries have on social media?
Also happens in the West. There are political opinions you can voice that will get you arrested in the West. So, including
in Canada.
Yeah. And so, exactly, including Canada. So I'm not surprised that people do want to commit to the existence of anonymity. Not at all surprised.
Yeah, and Eliza's heart is in the right place. Unfortunately, Jordan takes a less compassionate interpretation. He just says she's missing the point. And this doesn't feel like something Jordan would have said in a Q&A from a frustrated student quite a while ago. He would have heard them out. He would have been a bit more Socratic about it, rather than just tell her and lots of the other critics, no, they're wrong, you don't get what I'm saying. I think it's more so that, sure, I agree, these mechanisms can be exploited by people with dark triad personality traits. Josh and I have done plenty of coverage of that on the website, for example, with my strange fascination with serial killers. But I think that if everyone is telling you you're making the point either inarticulately or you may have overlooked a factor, it may not be that everyone is wrong, Jordan. That sounds condescending, but sincerely, it may be that you're not putting the point across, you've missed something.
But also, okay, so let's assume that a bunch of anti-Semites online are anonymously in your comments and they are exhibiting the dark triad personality types, saying, well, they pose an extreme threat to social integrity. It's like, well, I mean, we seem to have a problem with social integrity anyway. It seems that there isn't much of it. Closing the stable door after the horse is bolted is what springs to mind.
But I think Jordan, with his prior tact before his illness and before the pandemic and essentially coming out of a coma to realise the world's gone mad, so I don't blame him for being quite angry, he was an architect of the reformation of some social some social cohesion, and I think changing your tact back to that would do us all a great favour. So we can go to the next one. Again, I just want to say to him, just stop replying to these sort of anonymous accounts, because one account says, anonymity lets ideas stand on their own, not to be cloaked by deference to authority. And Jordan just says cliche. Sure, he's not wrong though. I mean, you can extricate ideas from the people posing them. I think it's a profoundly postmodern position to only say that the idea is unable to be removed from the person arguing it because it is always only being argued not from point of principle but to service their own pre-existing power ambitions. And Jordan would have criticised that position from before. I don't disagree with that.
We're going to have to debate this at some point because ideas are very clearly a product of a time and a place. I would agree that many ideas are posited to service people's own ambitions, but some ideas are not purely to supplant yourself in power. And that point is made here, but rather than engaging with the point, he engages with an anonymous account, which he says you shouldn't do, and then just dismisses it out of hand as a cliche. And this isn't, again, something Jordan would have done
quite a while ago, I don't think.
Yeah.
I think he would have added to the constructive dialogue.
You can see this isn't exactly resonating with people either. 343 likes.
He is getting ratioed, yes. And that's not necessarily an indicator of the highest academic bar of discourse,
No.
but it is showing that his own audience aren't big fans. Just go to the next one, please. He's then someone saying, this is getting old and tedious. I'm sorry you're a boomer, but these takes against anonymity are completely off the mark, and that is a little bit rude, just saying, sorry, you're a boomer. But then Jordan's saying the anonymous coward ignoring the research. Again, don't engage with the anonymous accounts, if we can go on.
But also, like, okay, yeah, don't engage with the anonymous accounts, but also, again, you don't know about the political situation that person's in. If they're like, well, okay, my boss will fire me if I say something conservative on the internet, which lots of people have found themselves in this position.
Yeah.
Well, like Eliza Blue pointed out, there are political reasons for anonymity.
Yeah, and the environment may not be there yet, but Jordan was playing a very crucial part before his absence in getting us there, and I think he could go back to that. Then he's releasing more threads on why these are counterproductive. He's saying they shouldn't be banned, but they should be segregated. We can go to the next one, please. And then I actually am not sure what he's saying here. So I think he's making a point about Schadenfreude, but this is where I'm saying, like, he's clearly got something he's thinking through, but it's just not translating properly. He's saying, make sense of the phrase lulz, all you advocating single-mindedly, and he's misspelled mindedly as well, so you can tell he's typing this out quite frustrated. For the virtues of anonymity, keeping in mind the fact that outright sadism is now included in the dark constellation of personality traits associated with trolling. So he's saying lulz is a form of Schadenfreude, or laughing at someone else's expense, but he has spoken repeatedly before about how the jester is an archetype adjacent to the hero. Yeah. So we should be able to mock those in power. Yeah. And that comedians are canaries in the coal mines.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? He could take a different frame on this and say, well, this is the archetype of the jester speaking truth to power.
Yeah, and this is exactly what the regime most fear, hence why they're trying to censor you and comedians, Jordan. So you should actually allow for these anonymous accounts to at least punish your enemies and make them look ridiculous with memes. And again, you are a verified account. You can only interact with verified accounts.
And it's probably wise if you did.
Yes. So you do have the tools to segregate yourself and extricate yourself from the anonymous accounts if they're frustrating you that much. But it's not like they aren't without utility and politically and also just for the expression of suppressed freedoms.
There is something undignified about upbraiding the peanut gallery for being insufficiently virtuous.
Yes. Yes. Because you don't actually, again, you don't even know who you're speaking to. Like when he's addressing a room full of men who have showed up self-selectively to hear him speak, there's something really noble to that. And he always says, oh, they came dressed in their Sunday best. You know, they were really engaged. Now you are just talking to people on the internet whose intentions, they're nebulous and you don't actually know at what stage in the journey they are of bringing yourself on board. That's why it seems like you're overcorrecting by being too angry to try and drag them along with you, rather than having a compassionate hand extended out and they take it.
And the way that I look at things like Twitter is it's essentially a coliseum, and the unverified and anonymous accounts are just the crowd throwing bits of food and stuff like that. You know, don't take them seriously.
If we can go to the next one, please. So this is the sort of frustrating part of where he seems to be going down a bit of a trust the experts line here.
Right.
And someone's pointed out as saying that sadism is a bit of a hyperbolic term. Trolling has a range of intents. It can be and usually is an often clever ribbing or teasing similar to the way healthy males interact. And he's saying, wrong. The emerging psychological literature indicates that clinical sadism itself is a significant contributing factor, and the effects are not small. Given that psychopathy, narcissism, and Machiavellianism also contribute, this problem should not be hand-waved away. And he's saying, because the literature has determined that this may be an exploitable tool by the darkest possible people, we have to revoke this as a potential. It seems very managerial to me, very unlike the take personal responsibility approach his messaging always had.
It's given way too much credit. I just don't think they're that clever and that well thought out, frankly.
Yes. So I actually agree with one of Jordan's other posts, which was very recent as well. Is it time to ubiquitously start spray painting the lenses of our CCTV cameras? Because this was after a story where the Canadian government has been hiring the facial recognition cameras from the Chinese government. If you're happy to stop public surveillance, Jordan, then
public anonymity, as it were.
Exactly. Online digital surveillance, which will be co-opted by the regime, is not the best idea either. Now, just before we finish up, I'd like to say, beware what the compassion of your crusade may be being exploited by cynical actors for. Because if we go to this, as we've already alluded to, Jordan is trying to cross the aisle and speak to both Muslims and Jews, especially ever since starting working at the Daily Wire with Ben and speaking to Netanyahu. He's been speaking to Mohammed Hijab on more than one occasion.
Of all the people on earth, why him?
I don't think Jordan knows who Mohammed Hijab is.
Right, okay, that explains it.
He seems to be thinking of himself as a prominent representative of the Muslim community in Britain. And during this interview, Mohammed Hijab comes across very reserved, very subdued, and very reasonable. Same with his interaction with Jonathan Page and Jordan.
This is the dark triad of traits that we were speaking about, Jordan.
Yes, chameleonism, Machiavellianism. And if you would like, Jordan, to look at what Mohammed Hijab was doing around the time that you released this interview, we have some clips here, because I'm going to use something you said today, know them by the friends they keep regarding the Palestinian and Iranian anti-Jewish coalition. If we go over to what Mohammed Hijab was doing in Leicester around the riots between the Hindus and the Muslims over here, he was gathering Muslims together in mosques to, and the quote was, to tell all the so-called Hindu-far gangsters don't ever come out like that again. And if you aren't aware, there was a cricket match and pre-existing ethnic tensions were inflamed, and it led to nights of fiery, violent riots between Muslim men and Hindus in the city of Leicester, which I believe is the UK's largest minority share.
Yeah, it is.
city.
Yeah, 33% English.
Yes, diversity is not doing its wonders here for community cohesion, and it seems that this is an insurmountable divide that even you, Jordan, with your best of intent, can't quite overcome yet. And if you don't quite believe me that these are the words from Mohammed Hijab's mouth, specifically regarding the Jews, Jordan, which you've also been speaking to and trying to create peace with, I'm going to play this clip, which is quite inflammatory. Let's listen.
It was terrifying. The boys had to be rescued by the police as bottles and eggs rained down on them. Mohammed Hijab then threatened a police officer that he'd kill the boy's dog if he saw it again.
However, when those Zionists came in with their dogs, that was an act of provocation. So what we're saying now, and I'm making it very clear so everyone understands, if those dogs come close to us again, we will see it as an act of aggression, and we will kill those dogs. We'll put them down.
Hijab and Dawa then led the crowd to Speaker's Corner, and as the mob marched through London streets, screaming, "We'll find some Jews, we want their blood," the police did nothing. Let that sink in. They're calling for our literal blood, and the police are just strolling alongside them.
We'll find some Jews there. We want the Zionists, we want the blood.
This is the next anti-Jewish edition.
A couple of hours later, we were violently assaulted leaving a kosher restaurant in an anti-Semitic attack. I hate to say this, but I'm not sure there's a future for Jews in this country. We're being attacked on the streets by extremists, and the police do nothing.
The difference between us and them is that for them, they think life begins. For us, we believe that death begins. We believe that life begins at death. We don't care about death. We love death. And if you think that our people in Palestine or across the Arab and Muslim world will let go of the struggle and our sacred places like Al-Aqsa, you are grossly mistaken. You will never, ever, and I say this to Netanyahu, I say this to all of the powers, we will never allow you to put your gross hands on Masjid Al-Aqsa. It will never happen.
Yeah.
We love death.
Yeah. Netanyahu's gross hands, said by the man who Jordan interviewed in good faith, believing he was an accurate representative of British Muslims, shortly before he then...
God, I hope he's not.
No, neither do I. Shortly before, if we go over, please, John, Jordan then obviously interviewed Netanyahu recently. Yeah. And so I think, unfortunately, Jordan's best intentions are being exploited by the most cynical possible people.
I just want to be clear. I think Netanyahu's a cynical person as well, because I watched like the first 20, 30 minutes of this, and Netanyahu totally lied about the history of the region, actually. I could go into, he says it's the Arabs that first began chucking the Jews out of Palestine. So that's not true. That's absolutely not true.
His role also in the starting of the Iraq War was not particularly noble either. And he has been accused of corruption in the past.
Well, yeah, obviously.
And so, unfortunately, again, Jordan's best of intentions
taken advantage of by bad people
by
on
people
both sides,
who are not anonymous, but still just as Machiavellian and power hungry. And that's why
evidently sadistic.
Yeah, I'm saying, essentially, we'll finish with the next clip, just so Jordan, I advise you to take some of your own advice, which I really took to heart a couple of years ago, but maybe rein in the anger, rein in the frustration. I know it's difficult. Even this job's blackpilling sometimes, you know. We read so much bad news all day. But I know I and many other young men would find that a lot more helpful if you didn't try and tackle all the world's political issues at once and instead focus back on your message of personal responsibility and being strong family men. So if we can just play this last clip, please.
So what is your advice to young people when you talk about you need to be individually responsible, but when there are things that are so far out of our control, like climate catastrophe, like the precarious job economy, like the economic crisis? What is your answer to
Do you think
people
that you're worse off than
questions?
Do you think that you're worse off than your grandparents?
I think there are different challenges.
Do you think you're worse off than your grandparents?
I think that
Jordan, once again, we're not going to cross-examine our questioners. So try answering the question about collective responsibility on climate change, for example. Pick one part of that, because the argument, I think, is that individual responsibility does not change the climate, does not fix the problem that needs global collective responsibility. So I think that's the core of the question. Do you have a theory about that?
Well, fundamentally, I'm a psychologist, and my experience has been that people can do a tremendous amount of good for themselves and for the people who are immediately around them by looking to their own inadequacies and their own flaws and the things that they're not doing in their lives and starting to build themselves up as more powerful individuals. And if they're capable of doing that, and then they're capable of expanding their career. And if they're capable of expanding their career and their competence, then they're capable of taking their place in the community as effective leaders. And then they're capable of making wise decisions instead of unwise decisions when it comes to making collective political decisions. I'm not suggesting in the least, and have never suggested, that there's no domain for social action. I'm suggesting that people who don't have their own houses in order should be very careful before they go about reorganizing the world, which happens in many ways.
What's she shaking her head for? Honestly,
because
insufferable.
she is an imperialist ideologue who just wants the airtime. And unfortunately, more and more people may be trying to use Jordan's platform for that. So I would urge, as one final word from a man who's always found your books, your lectures, everything very encouraging, Dr. Peterson, that perhaps you may be exceeding the domain which you are most effective, venturing outside your bedroom and trying to reorder too much of the world at once. We would find it most helpful if you went from being a very frustrated man at the moment back to being, well,
the wise man.
Yeah, the loving father figure that we all appreciated. So if you did watch this, thanks for sticking through it, and God bless.
Thanks for watching that segment from the podcast Lotus Eaters, and I hope you're all having a very Merry Christmas so far. If you'd like to find more, you can subscribe over at our website, lotuseaters.com, for £5 a month to gain access to all of our wonderful premium content, including this recent article that I wrote on individualism and collectivism and how it's a false dichotomy between the two. If you'd like to learn more about what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis, you can follow me over at Getter at Harry Lotus Eater. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon.